Hello. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see all of you here despite the rain. I'm Jean Shaheen. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics, and I want to welcome all of you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. We have a very special guest tonight, one that I'm very excited about because, of course, I'm partial to women governors. Our forum address this evening, Kansas and the Missing Political Link, is going to be delivered by a woman who personifies what we think is important at the Institute of Politics, that public service is a noble profession. Governor Kathleen Sebelius was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. She grew up in a politically active family and is the daughter of John J. Gilligan, who was the former governor of Ohio, and she and her father are the first father-daughter pair of governors in this country's history. She moved to Kansas at the age of 26 to pursue a master's in public administration at the University of Kansas. She should, of course, have come to the Kennedy School. In 1986, she successfully ran for the Kansas House of Representatives, where she served for 2 terms. Later, she became the first Democrat in over 100 years, I think that was the entire history of Kansas, to serve as the state insurance commissioner, one of the few elected insurance commissioners in the country. While she is a Democrat, Governor Sebelius has had great success reaching out to moderate Republicans in what has been a traditionally conservative and Republican state. In her re-election campaign in 2006, the former head of the Kansas Republican Party became a Democrat in order to serve as her running mate, and Governor Sebelius won that election with 58% of the vote. Time magazine named her one of the nation's top governors, citing her work to cut waste, streamline government services, and bridge the partisan divide in Kansas. As a woman governor, our special guest is also part of a great statistic. Right now, there are more women governors than there have been in the history of this country at any other time. Please join me in welcoming to the forum Kansas Governor Kathleen Sebelius.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jean, for that wonderful welcome, and more importantly, thank you, Jean, for your incredible public service. Jean was a great governor, a role model for all of us who ran after she served. She actually was part of Girl Governor Camp when I was thinking about running, that consisted of candidates and sitting governors coming together and giving us tips, and I was grateful for that. But actually, I've known Jean since 1984, when she was the New Hampshire chairman of the Gary Hart for President campaign, and I was the Kansas chairman of that was the first Gary Hart campaign, let me remind you. So our friendship goes back a long way, and I'm delighted to have a chance to be here. I also need to give a little shout out to my son, Ned Sebelius, who's in the master's program, Master's in Public Policy, and my niece, Hannah Kamas, who is here tonight and lives here in the Boston area. And a surprise visitor, it's a surprise to me, it's not a surprise to her, but one of the participants in your year-long Leadership Institute for Hispanic Women is our own very state representative, Delia Garcia, the first Latina woman elected to the legislature. I did have to scold her for just a moment because the legislature started again today, and I just want to make sure she comes back home soon because we need her vote. She assured me tomorrow she will be there. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to share with you a little bit of background and thoughts about the political system, and then I really look forward to a dialogue with you. As you've already heard from Governor Shaheen, I've had the real honor of serving as governor of Kansas for the past 5 years. I was the elected insurance commissioner for 8 years before that, and in the House of Representatives for 8 years before that. I seem to work in these 8-year cycles. But I came to public service through a bit of a different pathway. I was kind of born into public service. My dad ran for office for the first time when I was 5 years old. He then was in public office for the entire time I grew up. I really thought that's what folks did in the fall. They went door to door and put up yard signs. I never knew it was a voluntary activity. No one ever suggested that to me. But in our household, while we were certainly taught that individual success was important, individual achievement, certainly school was important, we were also taught that we were part of something bigger, and that you had a responsibility to actually think about people other than yourselves, to contribute something to this society. And in fact, we were taught, those of us who had the great sense to choose wonderful parents, that a phrase that was often repeated in my household was, to those of whom much is given, much is expected. And that was really a mantra growing up. It was really about the common good, and the common good is a principle, a founding principle of the United States. In fact, the preamble of the Constitution calls upon us to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. It's a principle of our nation and particularly our political system, and yet we seem to be further and further away from that in recent years. After World War II, which is one of the greatest examples of individuals really coming together around a common cause, not only for the benefit of their own nation, but for the benefit of the world, we really saw this explosion of the individual consumer in this country. The economy boomed in America. The GDP more than tripled in the second half of the century. So we saw an increase in the median household of almost $10,000, going from about $35,000 to over $46,000 by 2005. More people owned homes, more people owned cars, more people owned stocks, and had an opportunity to really express themselves through a whole range of consumer-driven market decisions. And so the moniker that's often used today is the ownership society. And it's something that you hear often from this administration, who talks about we want more Americans to belong to the ownership society. It's a notion that when people are free to act, particularly as themselves as individuals, unfettered by government or communal obligation, that they're the happiest, they're the most productive. It's a great spin, the ownership society, and it actually sounds kind of good to say it. But I think as a policy, it's not only damaging to our country, it may even be dangerous to our democracy. Unfortunately, when many say ownership society, they mean ownership-only society, neglecting the individuals which are out there on their own, neglecting those issues which cause us to come together as a society and have no ownership, but actually belong to all of us as citizens of this country. And in fact, I think we can look at the term ownership society, and it often gets translated into you're on your own ship society. The ownership society is one that is pushed by the current administration and unfortunately has been used as a precursor to dismantle our institutions of common interest and our notion that the duties and benefits of an American belong to all of us. The dismantling has often been under the guise of an appeal to a greater sense of individual happiness, derived from greater access to consumer goods. But if asked, most Americans will tell you that their happiness doesn't come from things we buy. And despite our great material wealth now in this society that's been amassed over the last half of the century, Pew Research Institute has done some happiness measuring in America, and what they find is Americans are less happy now than they were. The peak, actually, of happiness register was in 1974, in the midst of our energy crisis, and since then has been on the decline. So if money doesn't buy happiness, then what is it that drives our happiness as citizens of this country? I'm a believer that it is a sense of community. It is a sense that deep down we do belong together, that we really are all in this together, and that we're called upon to do something more than focus on our own needs and our own wishes. Humans are social creatures. Research, again, shows us that about 45% of Americans say that their ideal neighborhood is one where people communicate with one another, watch out for each other's kids, hold block parties, talk to each other, and that only about 10% of people want to be in places where they only see their neighbors periodically. We want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to be involved in causes that reach beyond our own well-being. So whether it's a neighborhood or a church group or part of a sports team or even a fan of a sports team, it's a great feeling of belonging to something. I don't know that there's any better way to celebrate that feeling than being one of 16,000 of your closest friends standing in the best basketball venue in America, Allen Fieldhouse, and singing the Rock Chalk chant. But that bottom line is people are searching for ways to be part of a community, bonds that bring us together. But so much of the politics of the recent decades have been doing just the opposite, have been designed to drive us apart. We've moved from the sense of common good to a slash and burn politics designed to win elections, but really a terrible theory under which to govern. First, it was the wedge issues: abortion, guns, flag burning, gay marriage. And in Kansas, we are the battleground of a number of those wedge issues. In 1974, when Bob Dole ran for re-election to the United States Senate, he ran against an OBGYN two-term congressman named Bill Roy. In his training and in his background, Bill Roy had performed abortions. It was the first time that abortion was introduced into the modern political venue. Bill Roy was tagged as an abortionist, and it was a way to make sure that Bob Dole was successfully reelected. That was over 30 years ago, and that was Kansas. We then had the Summer of Mercy in Wichita, where we had people from all over the country come to Wichita to try and shut down a clinic. We've had fights over what we teach in our schools. We've had immigration battles. So we've seen no lack of those wedge issues. All of us involved are looking at litmus tests that creates a divisiveness. You're either with us or you're against us. Again, it's a great way sometimes to win an election, but it is a terrible way to bring people together to make key decisions about the future. In the last couple of elections, those wedge issues have gone even further. Now we're into micro-targeting. And micro-targeting in the political arena means that we are going to analyze everything about you, what magazines you read, what products you buy, and communicate with you based on your individual choices, not your members even of your household, but you. We're going to pick you out and make sure that we can touch the 3 or 4 buttons that affect your decisions. And it, again, is a relatively cynical view that believes that 1 or 2 issues is all you care about. If you buy certain magazines, you'll be impressed to vote for a candidate based on a couple of issues. And I believe, again, it's corrosive to the democracy and destroys our very sense of community. And the national media hasn't helped this much at all. Instead of, again, highlighting the common values and the common goals that we hold across this country, we're now focused on whether you're in a red state or a blue state, or whether you're in a red county or a blue county, whether you get up in the morning and think differently and feel differently. We even have political reporters who travel across the country from East Coast and West Coast to come to the middle where I live, directly in the middle of the country, to find out how unusual it is that people in Kansas would share any values or views with people in Massachusetts or California. They marvel about how Kansans could possibly elect a woman, much less a Democratic woman as governor, much less a Latina woman to the legislature. And that's highlighted, I think, as a way to separate people from one another. It makes for great reading, but frankly, it doesn't make for good governing. We do need government and community institutions. There is such a thing as we, the people, because we are all in this together. And we must find a way to come together around the common good. September 11th, 2001 shattered a lot of illusions. It shattered the illusions that oceans will protect us, the idea that American military power could deter any attackers, the idea that government was something to be privatized and stunned and starved. Government's basic duty, whether it's a governor or a mayor or president of the United States, is to protect our citizens, providing by the common defense, which is in the preamble also. So when the government failed in that basic duty, a lot of Americans realized just how important government is to their security. So 9/11 began to renew this sense of national unity. Maybe there is a cause to come together and rally around, only to have it once again exploited by those who continue to advance the notion that it's every man for himself. And they were successful for a while, until we had Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was a punch in the gut to America. Watching those images on television, and to me they're still searing to this day, seeing people on the roofs of their houses calling for help, trying to save themselves and their family, and you couldn't believe this was America, this was our country. And we were watching people who were not only for the moment abandoned and neglected, but people who literally for decades had been abandoned and neglected, who needed that common sense of belonging and value, and who were left really to die because we were not prepared to respond to them. I think it's time for, once again, us to renew those values of coming together. Our ability to pull together as one is the strength of the American government and the American people. And is it any wonder that, again, the Pew Center, which looks at these measurements, saw dramatic jumps in the international approval of Americans when we responded to the world tragedy following the tsunami, when we provided aid to those who were in trouble around the world. I'm a believer that the biggest challenges facing us, we can meet and solve, but we can't meet it as 300 million individuals. We can only meet it as 300 million Americans working together. Millions of individual achievements are going to make the common good and our national success. But in order to recognize that, we need to recognize that individual success is often a result of that collective commitment. It starts in this country with education, a collective commitment to excellence in education. It was one of the founding principles of this democracy. It was one of the initial values that distinguished us from countries around the world, that every American was entitled to a quality public education. And over again, the government has stepped forward, even in very difficult times, to renew that commitment. The great founding of land-grant institutions at a difficult time in this country, the GI Bill of Rights, which transformed an entire generation, subsidized student loans. And educated citizenry is important not only to our competitiveness as a country, but it's important to the health of our democracy. Never has this been more critical than now, as we face global challenges and as other nations around the globe are really coming to the realization that education has to be the core of their commitment moving forward. We're never going to be able to outcompete nations in this world on low wages, and frankly, we don't want to. What we have to be able to do is have the best educated workforce in the world, and in that capacity be able to continue our competitive edge. We can compete with the skill and talent of our workforce. We can compete on the field of ideas, but it's going to take, again, the renewed commitment to collectively invest in quality education in order to do that. Now, again, many in this administration are suggesting that We have over-invested in public education. Then what we really need to do is diversify those investments to a range of interests, not look at the gap in early childhood education that starts some children way behind their peers and they never catch up, not look at the fact that we don't have nearly enough citizens going on to higher education, making it easier for people to achieve the jobs of the 21st century, limiting scholarships, lowering grants, and now student loans with higher interest rates. I'm sure that's familiar to some of you in this room. We're doing that at a time nationally where other nations are recommitting themselves to education. China has doubled the number of post-secondary teachers in just the last 2 decades. They want to move their graduation rate for high school up to 90% in the next 10 years. We are struggling in this country to just retain teachers. We lose K through 12 teachers, 50% of them leave in the first 5 years. So we are going in a direction very differently than some of the nations we will be competing with. In our state of Kansas, we just completed a 7-year struggle for education funding and again renewed the commitment that we need to dedicate resources to making sure that not just some of our children, but that all of our children have a quality education. The same is true with the challenge of healthcare. Healthcare is a collective responsibility that we have, and I did have a background that allowed me to participate in some key healthcare decisions as insurance commissioner and continue to work on that as governor. But you don't have to have a background in the health industry to know what we're doing in this country just doesn't make any sense. We spend more than any other nation on healthcare, about $1,000 more than the next competitor, which is Luxembourg. And yet we get worse results for those dollars. We have 47 million Americans uninsured, and we're layering the costs of healthcare onto individual industries in this country so that our car industry, our manufacturing industries are getting less and less competitive with industries around the world, and yet we keep repeating it. Now, some people will suggest we don't have national health care. That's just wrong. We do. It's called the emergency room. How many of you in this room have health insurance? Raise your hands. That's good. Virtually everyone has your hand raised. 16 cents of every dollar you pay for health insurance is spent paying for those who have no insurance. And we pay for them to obtain health care through emergency room doors, the least effective and most expensive way to pay for that care. They come to the emergency room when they're sicker, when they haven't had the preventive coverage what they need, they don't have a health home. More kids are hospitalized without health care. More women have low birth weight babies because they didn't have prenatal care. It doesn't make any sense, and yet we continue to repeat it over and over again. Again, I'm alarmed at some of the proposals floating out of this administration right now, which suggests we dismantle the social contract that is health insurance, that we essentially give everybody their own chit and you can buy your own health care. Now, that's great if you're young and healthy and looking at a great health future. You probably can save money not being in an insurance pool. But if you have any health incident or any health history in your family, if you have any tendency to have a disease, if you're likely to have children, if you have ever had a heart attack, it's not so good, because being on your own in the health market dismantles the ability to pool those who are healthy with those who tend to get sick. I think Americans understand, I know that citizens in our state understand, we do have a collective responsibility to make sure that all our citizens have health care, that all of our citizens have access to quality medicine that we have available in this country. It's the right thing to do financially because, frankly, we'll save money. Pooling risks lowers costs. It also is the right thing to do morally because it's unacceptable in this nation to continue on the pathway of those who don't have access to important healthcare. It's what brings together the oddest bedfellows that I've seen in a very long time. A month ago, Walmart, the largest corporation in America, and SEIU, the largest and most active labor union in America, the Service Employees Union, joined together around principles that demand we move forward in America on universal health care for all. Now, if Walmart and SEIU understand that that partnership is important, I think it's a great illustration that we have come to the point where we have a national mandate to move forward collectively. The final issue I just want to touch on for a minute is the environment, which is the same challenge, huge challenge in this country. Becoming energy secure, energy independent, driving alternative energy is a challenge that is there for America, reducing our carbon footprint. So we take up the mantle of being good stewards for this land. I come from a state where 20% of our jobs still are directly related to agriculture, where we know that the changing climate affects a lot of the opportunity to raise crops. We're seeing a dramatic shift in what's happening to our land. We have a responsibility, not only to future generations, but frankly, to this generation. What we know, again, is Americans are willing to pay more. They're willing to step up and be called upon for social responsibility. They're willing to engage in everything from conservation efforts to startup, alternative energy, to shift the kind of energy portfolio that we have. And again, I think it's a challenge facing us, but an opportunity to come together. I've talked tonight a bit about the return to community and the common good. And I say return because, frankly, we've been there before at times where this nation was challenged. My state of Kansas was founded by people who had their own freedom, but knew that we would never prosper as a nation unless all individuals enjoyed that freedom. Abolitionists came from the East Coast to found the state of Kansas during the early days before the Civil War because they wanted a free state west of the Mississippi. They wanted an action for the common good. They were willing to make personal sacrifices to come to the plains and make sure that individuals in other parts of the country enjoyed individual freedoms. So action for the common good over and over and over again in this country is the rule rather than the exception, because time and time again our nation has banded together to defeat threats and overcome challenges. And I'm absolutely convinced and optimistic we can do it again. I want to close and have a chance to answer your questions, but I want to share with you some words that were spoken in Osawatomie, Kansas, a little town just southwest of Kansas City, in 1910. Former President Theodore Roosevelt, Harvard class of 1880, had come to speak to a celebration of abolitionist John Brown. And in a nation that was seeing the effects of an earlier ownership-only society, the robber baron era, he called for action to further the common good. Roosevelt said, "The object of government is the welfare of the people. The material progress and prosperity of a nation are desirable chiefly so far as they lead to the moral and material welfare of all of our citizens." So just as Roosevelt said in 1910, I believe we have an opportunity to direct our future progress and prosperity to the common good of all. I believe we have a challenge and, frankly, an obligation to create a new kind of politics that brings people together around common visions and common values to meet the challenges of our day. And I believe we have an opportunity to create a brighter future if we remain focused on the common good and if we recognize we really are all in this together. So thank you again, Jean, for your kind invitation. Thank you for your kind attention. I'd be glad to have a chance to have a little dialogue with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you Governor Sebelius. That was great. Now we come to the question and answer part of the program, and just to go over the ground rules for everybody, we would ask that if you have a question that you go to the microphone, that hopefully you will ask a question, not make a statement. So that means concise, and we will move from mic to mic. And one of the things that I would urge everybody in the audience to do is to make sure we have lots of women getting up and asking questions. This is my pet peeve in the forum, that we get parity among women with questions. So we'll start here and then we'll move up. So remember to introduce yourselves and tell us what you're doing here.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Mark. I'm a mid-career at the Kennedy School. I'm not a woman, but I hope it's okay if I go first. I wanted to ask on the topic of forging community and building togetherness. Tomorrow night, the director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, is coming, talking about how we're going to balance or the challenge in balancing national security and civil rights. And I'm wondering how in Kansas that challenge is being grappled with, particularly in the area of everything from racial profiling to issues of tolerance, particularly with regard to Arab Americans and Muslims in America, in light of a lot of fear that I'm sure is existent there as it is everywhere else in the country around terrorism.
Great question, and thank you, Mark. Thanks to great leadership of Delia Garcia and others in our legislature, we actually passed an initial bill banning racial profiling, took on head-on the notion that we had some major police departments and, frankly, the Highway Patrol who were discriminating on a fairly regular basis. So we had a study to back it up. We not only have a citizen review group now, but we have a training requirement, which is even more important, and community dialogue going on around that issue. We have a Muslim community in a couple of our cities that is pretty active and visible and targeted, frankly, by a number of people. And I have, as governor, tried to be very inclusive. I attend celebrations with the Muslim community. I've participated in community events, tried to be reaching out and also use it as a way to educate folks about different cultures. We are more homogeneous than a number of states. We have about 7% of our population is African American, just under 10 now is Latina, and very small numbers of others. So I think in a state like ours, it's even more important to make sure that people feel included and involved. And any way we can celebrate diversity, we take diversity in appointments and commissions and hirings very seriously. So we have leaders, visible leaders who represent Kansans of all different walks and nationalities. But I think the issue of how you balance security with issues involving race is no different than it's ever been, in that giving up civil liberties under the guise somehow that we need to be more secure, I think is a mistake. We can be very secure. We take security very seriously. I work closely with the Adjutant General and we have a Homeland Security Division, but we are also, I think, incredibly careful to try and make sure we have that appropriate balance, that we're not allowing our law enforcement to use the guise of fear or security issues to invade people's rights on a regular basis.
Thank you very much for coming to speak with us, Governor. I'm Sarah Hinkvis, a freshman at the college. And you talked about the environment as an area of shared space. And I was wondering if you could comment on how you deal with the balance between the needs of the agricultural sector to have a monoculture in order to meet the demands of the public, and then on the other hand, ecosystem services and the needs for biodiversity for environmental sustainability?
We have a growing crisis or a looming crisis in Kansas around water. And about 85% of our water is still used by agricultural interests. And we are, frankly, irrigating parts of our state that would be better as deserts than farmland because they don't have natural water, it doesn't replenish. That's probably the number one issue that we're trying to tackle right now, and actually with some considerable success. And it's everything from returning farmers to dry land farming and rewarding, providing incentives to buying back water rights, not leasing any more water rights, shifting crops. We're now in areas in Kansas growing cotton because it takes a third of the water that corn or wheat take. So we're shifting the agricultural interests, trying to find ways to diversify that economy. My secretary of the kind of wildlife and parks of the environment is the former Republican governor of Kansas, which is a kind of unique partnership. He is a national and internationally recognized expert on water and the ecosystems and on farming needs, and he has been very strategic, I think, helping to reform the land. We're putting a lot of land in conservation easements. We're trying to shift some of the balances so that we are careful stewards of the land, and we look down the road to the next several generations to make sure we can sustain not only where the grow a lot of the food that the world depends on, but actually grow food in a way that we can make sure we don't deplete all the resources for future generations.
Good afternoon, Governor. My name is Elizabeth Hadaway, and I am a sophomore at the college. And I am a Democrat from Texas, obviously a pretty red state. So my question for you is if you could go into more detail about some of the concrete strategies for being a blue Democrat in a red state and how you deal with that. I obviously have hopes that one day Texas might go back blue, so any advice would be much appreciated.
I think there is hope in Texas. I've been to Texas lately, and where's Annabelle? Is Annabelle here? Yeah, another Texas Democrat who wants to return home and make the state a little more blue. Part of it is, I think we have a great opportunity to begin to rebrand Democrats. It's one of the things that we've been trying to do in Kansas. There's a tendency for us to be branded by the other party. You're the tax and spend folks, you're the anti-business party, you're this, you're that. So it takes some office holders, some leaders to say, no, we're not that at all. This is what I am. When I was elected insurance commissioner, there were people who had come up to me and they felt the highest compliment they could give me was saying, you sound just like a Republican. That was a good thing for them. And I reminded them that I really didn't. This is what a Democrat sounds like. And they just had stopped listening a while ago. And if they like what I said, they would like other Democrats. I think you need a foothold first. You need some people to begin to redefine what Democrats do stand for. But I also think there is a growing split in the Republican Party in Kansas, in Texas, and around the country, where there is a very conservative, very anti-education, very, I would suggest, anti-woman, anti-virtually everything branch of the Republican Party. And there's a more moderate, traditional Rockefeller Republican, Nancy Kassebaum Republican, Nancy Johnson Republican Party. Those two branches don't like one another very well at all. We have used actually that split in the party in a state like Kansas as a way to invite moderate Republicans who are really being disinvited to remain in their own party into the Democratic Party and begin to have a broader coalition. So my current lieutenant governor is the former party chair of the Kansas Republican Party. Our attorney general was elected district attorney who was a Republican who became a Democrat. Delia has 4 or 5 colleagues in the legislature who were elected as county commissioners, city commissioners, mayors, as Republicans who have become Democrats, saying that they no longer recognize this party. They no longer feel they're a part of this party, and that we have become the pro-business, pro-education, pro-progress party, and they're much more comfortable being Democrats. So I think that's a strategy that can begin to grow around having some elected leaders who then recruit others. I mean, it starts small and it can grow a bit at a time, but it can take root, and I think having candidates who can identify with the citizens they represent, and regardless of party interests, have people cross the line is the way to start it.
Hi, my name is Linda Adamson. I'm a second year here at the Kennedy School. Earlier you mentioned the importance of using political discourse to bring communities together. I was wondering if you could comment on a couple of things that you did specifically during your last campaign to do that.
Sure. Well, I spent a lot of time in meetings like this. I mean, on university campuses, traveling around. I'm a big believer in sharing information with the people. So whether it's when I started as governor and we had a very open process to try and involve citizens in ways that we could save money at the state. We were broke, and we needed strategies. We invited private business owners in. We had a toll-free hotline for citizens to call in with their tips on ways that we could save money. We made the budgets very transparent. We opened up the process and basically said, everything's on the table. We want your ideas. We want your strategies. The healthcare proposals that I've put forward in the past, I've not only worked on with the elected Republican insurance commissioner when she and I co-sponsored things together, but then we traveled around the state together to town meetings and hospitals. We involved the healthcare professional. We brought people into the dialogue. Before then, we would show up at the legislature. So actually, legislators began hearing from people back home. The education initiative had business leaders at the table to try and help formulate a proposal, but also to help be the echo chamber. I find that if you're going to have initiatives supporting education funding, education excellence, the best voices are the business leaders saying, I need an educated workforce. You all know that at Harvard. That's why you're here. But those voices are very powerful. So rather than just trying to have a dialogue within the State House or within, the limited number of people who get a chance to vote, it really started with a community dialogue and then would come back into the State House and become a policy. So whether it was the campaign or how we actually put proposals on the table, that's been a process that I've tried to use all over the state. I'm out and about a lot and trying to really engage and involve people in participating in this government.
Hello, my name is Chiaki Yamada, a second-year MPA student here at the school, Kennedy School. I spent most of my life in Japan, but with 4 years experience of living in California and 2 years in here in Massachusetts. And having lived in both sides of the coast, I came to realize that in order to understand the United States in the broader past perspective, I have to visit the states in the middle because I'm so ignorant about them, such as assuming that Kansas City is in Kansas. And so I'm thinking of traveling.
It's in both. You'd be right, Kansas and Missouri.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of traveling around the area after I graduate in June. So my question is, as a governor, what aspects of Kansas would you want the no U.S. travelers like me to see? Could you give me some travel advice?
Well, first of all, come to Kansas. It's a beautiful state. One of the international treasures that we have is a stretch of tallgrass prairie called the Flint Hills, which goes from the Nebraska border to the Oklahoma border, and it is 95% of the tallgrass prairie left in the world. You will see an area that has never been tilled and looks the way it did 2,000 years ago. If you want to see where 50% of the airplanes are made in the world, you need to visit Wichita, which makes more airplanes than any place else in this country, private aircraft. We have a booming farmland. The western two-thirds of the state is full of wheat fields and some cornfields, more cows than people, but kind of the breadbasket of the country. We also have great community highlights like the largest ball of twine in the country, which has its own house in Cawker City. The largest hand-dug well is in Greensburg. So there are many, many things to see as you visit Kansas.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, good evening, Governor. My name is Tamalola Shabawali. I'm a junior here at the college, and I've been studying this past semester about gender and representation in U.S. politics, and I was wondering if you could talk some more about your campaign and how you dealt with a lot of the obstacles that come from, because as Governor Sheen noted, there are very few female governors, and in fact, very few females in U.S. politics, so how you dealt with some of these obstacles running as a female.
Sure. The good news is we're getting better. We're not nearly as well represented as women in America as countries around the world, but we are getting better. There are more women in the United States Senate now than ever before. There are more women in the House of Representatives now than ever before. And there are 9 women governors. When I ran in 2002, there were only 13 women in the history of this country, either party, who had ever served as governor, Jean Shaheen being one of them. So we are making some progress. Kansas is actually a state with a long and rich tradition of women in office. So we are a little different than some states which have never sent a woman to Congress and never had a woman lead the state. I'm the second elected woman governor of Kansas. There are only 2 states who have had 2 women governors. And in Kansas, actually, running as a woman is a bit of a plus because we're one of the highest states with women in the legislature and have had women serve in every elected office in the state. There's still some challenges, no question about it, and some issues that are in the back of voters' minds, even if they don't say them out loud, they're probably thinking them. So it's always good to probably address those up front. But I think what's really important is that for all of us who serve in public office is young girls are paying attention. They know my name, they know I'm the governor, they come to the office, they are so excited about the fact that they could do this someday, you know, that we've opened a door. The initials for the state of Kansas are KS, and they are carved on banisters and wood carvings all over our Capitol. My name is Kathleen Sebelius, and I had a little girl come to my office recently with her grandmother to take some photos, and she was just so excited. She said, "Do you know they have carved your initials all over this Capitol?" And I said to her, "I do know that, and when you're governor, they're gonna carve your initials all over this Capitol too." So I think each one of us opens a door for some folks who will come after us, and we just have to keep fighting and keep pulling and make sure there are more of us in the future. Yes.
Good evening, Governor. My name is Cynthia Alviar. I'm a proud fellow of the National Hispana Leadership Institute. And my question, I feel very privileged to follow on the heels of the latter question, the last question, in order to allow some expansion on that theme. My question is two-part question, and it relates to the changing demographics of your state and the region. And I'm curious to know what steps can be taken to increase the number of women leaders, including the governorship, and particularly to increase the number of Latina leaders, like our Representative Delia Garcia, and looking at that because, among other things, she represents that changing demographic.
A great question, and I think Delia's being elected in and of itself is a triumph, and she does a wonderful job bringing young women to the Capitol, mentoring folks, that's essential. I think that we've tried to do that in appointments and in boards. One of the things that is a great stepping stone to running for office is having some exposure to government. A lot of people won't be directly involved in a campaign if they've really never been involved at any level. So I've taken on very seriously the challenge as an employer. We have 40,000 employees. I want to make sure that our workforce is diversified, that we involve people at that level in paid appointments, but also in boards and commissions. Serving on a board or commission is a great way to begin decision-making, to begin to get exposure to the government process. And I think too often, the lists of people who want to serve on boards and commissions is very narrow and comes out of a group of folks who have access to government. So I spend a lot of time and energy trying to broaden those lists, reaching out with friends across this state to build a bank of people who want to get involved and want to be active. But I think it's a constant struggle to make it accessible, to open up government, to invite people to be involved, to have leadership training programs, and we can never take for granted that just because we live in a democracy that it's going to happen. So I think extra effort to make sure that all groups are represented, that we encourage underrepresented minorities to participate and begin making decisions about their future is a challenge, and one that I take very seriously.
Thank you.
Sure. Finally, a brave man got in line.
Hi, good evening, Governor. My name is Les Burnell, and I work as a legislative staffer in the Massachusetts legislature. And my question is a little bit more of a harder one, but it's something I know I've been wrestling with, and I know it's an issue that you've been wrestling with, and other Democratic governors around the country have been wrestling with. And preface my remarks saying that I know your sentiments about the ownership society, and I think you talked about the return to community and the common good. And I thought your quote from Teddy Roosevelt was excellent, and that summarizes how a lot of people in this room feel about government. But my question goes to kind of a public policy that's emerging both from Republicans and Democrats, but lately more from Democrats at the state level, and that is promoting casino gambling as a form of taxation. And and I know it's, and I'm not opposed to the issue of gambling. It's an idea of the government pushing a product that at a higher level that they know is highly addictive for folks. And we can agree, we talk about the common good. I mean, people in this room here aren't going to be playing slot machines. And so I'm wondering how you reconcile the message you gave tonight with I know Kansas just recently signed that bill. How do you reconcile those two messages? And as a Democrat, because I think within our own party, it's going to be becoming a bigger issue, and I'm wondering how you can kind of articulate that a little bit.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's not an uncomplicated issue and struggle. We in Kansas had a constitutional amendment passed in 1986 where the majority of voters decided that they wanted a state lottery and that they wanted to have pari-mutuel tracks. So it was put on the ballot. The majority voted for it. From that point on, really for the last 20 years, there have been a whole variety of debates of whether we would expand those opportunities. We are in a situation geographically where right across the state line, there are casinos on the Missouri side. Most of the cars in the parking lot have Kansas tags on them, but they happen to be on the Missouri side. We now have seen a significant expansion of gaming in Oklahoma on our southern border, again, drawing citizens there. So as a pragmatic situation, frankly, what we were doing is shipping hundreds of millions of dollars to surrounding states and not capturing that revenue in Kansas. Kansans gamble. They just leave the state to gamble. They go to other states and spend their revenue there. So we had, if anything, all of the problems associated, and there are significant problems with problem gaming and with addicted gamblers, but none of the revenue. So for the last number of years, I have really worked on a strategy for allowing the citizens, again, in selected communities in Kansas to vote on whether or not they wanted an opportunity to have some expansion of that, and that's the bill that passed. It's unclear, I think it's likely, but still a little unclear whether those votes will pass. If the people decide they don't want those opportunities in Wichita and Kansas City and Southeast Kansas, they won't happen. But frankly, it was a bit of a catch-22 where by not having the gambling opportunities, destination casinos in Kansas, we were just shipping that revenue elsewhere. We weren't stopping gambling. I mean, Kansans clearly were involved. We just were essentially sending the revenue elsewhere.
But as a Democrat, do you think the Democrats should get out of the gambling business? I mean, do you think because those are our people in those casinos, that's the point. These are 80% of the revenues in a casino comes from 20% of the players. And so that's what I'm saying. Should we as Democrats, in terms of rebranding ourselves, I mean, those are our people there, and those are their tax dollars going there. That's really
right. And I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think, again, a lot of the citizens who engage in that gambling are going to do it in their own state, in another state, on the internet, wherever they can find the opportunity. It isn't that we are going to cancel gambling in this country. So I think then you look at the next step of what are the opportunities in Kansas, at least at the racetracks. We also have an agricultural industry of raising horses and dogs that becomes a value-added product. But I understand what you're saying, and I don't think it's a Democratic or Republican issue. It's frankly a form of revenue that a lot of states are turning to as it expands across the country.
Hi, my name is Myrna Johnson. I am also a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm thrilled you're here for a couple of reasons. One is that you're a woman, of course, but the other is that you're a Westerner. We've had precious few speakers from the West, and I grew up in the Midwest and call Colorado home, so I'm thrilled that you're here. I wanted to go to healthcare, though. I think you bring in a perspective, having been insurance commissioner, that could maybe add some value to the debate. I come from, before coming to the school here, I was working for an industry association that had a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and it's the fastest growing part of their budget, and it's very, very difficult to keep covering employees. So I wondered what kinds of solutions you're coming up with, and what you see happening on the national scene with these agreements now between Walmart and the labor unions.
Well, first of all, there's very little happening on the national scene, and that's too bad. What we need is a national agenda and a kind of commitment to universal health care. I'm a believer that although if you could wipe the slate clean and start all over again, we would never start with an employer-based insurance product. That's really where we are. 75% of Americans who have health insurance have insurance coverage through their employers. The rest have it through government. And to dismantle something in order to get to a better cause, I think may be not as productive as closing the gap. So my sense is where we need to go in states and around the country is close the gap, get coverage for the 47 million Americans who don't have coverage, and then you can begin lowering costs. But you can't lower costs until everyone has a payment scheme, because absent that, all we're doing is shifting money around. You know, if we move coverage from low-income working families to some other group, then we just continue to pay for the cost of the uninsured. I think we got to do three things very quickly, and it's going to cost some money up front, but I think we'll get that money back very, very quickly as we begin to diminish the double payment. One is provide health coverage for everybody and begin to drive appropriate protocols. So we put more money in preventive care, less money in acute care, figure out preventive strategies. Secondly is to begin to really change people's lifestyle choices with massive consumer education campaigns, with getting a handle on what cafeteria choices are, mandating phys ed back in the schoolrooms. I mean, a whole range of strategy. Childhood obesity is killing our nation, and we are going to have seriously ill adults as a result of it. And if we don't, we can't keep doing what we're doing with tobacco, with exercise, with food choices. And third is drive technology. The healthcare industry is the kind of last industry in the country to use technology in a serious way. One of the things technology does is lower medical errors dramatically. If you have automatic dispensers for pharmaceuticals, you cut out almost all of the mispill diagnosis. If you have protocol that a doctor can look at as he or she gives a prescription that blocks an opportunity to get a prescription that mismatches with medicines that are already taken, you drop. So we've got to do technology, close the gap, and prevention simultaneously. That's going to take some upfront funding, but I think once we do that, we can really begin to have a system. And it should be, I mean, I'm all for a single-payer system eventually. I think what we have to do, though, is work with what we've got to close the gap and not keep taking coverage away from some and giving it to somebody else.
We have time for 3 more questions, so 1, 2, 3.
Good evening, Governor, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Indira, and I'm a sophomore at the college. I'm also from rural Minnesota, and I'm looking forward to a summer full of campaigning in rural New Hampshire. And I was wondering if you could offer some advice on motivating and engaging the rural voter, especially based on your experience in a rural state like Kansas.
Sure. Actually, Governor Shaheen here is the one you might talk to about rural New Hampshire, because she has found lots of ways to motivate rural New Hampshire voters. Again, you know, kind of back to the theme of this, rural voters are not different than urban voters in lots of ways. They're interested, my experience is, in very much the same thing: good jobs for their kids, an opportunity to have affordable health care, some sense that there be good schools in communities. There's a bit of a fear in our state. We have a bigger state than New Hampshire in terms of geography, and the western part of the state, the towns are getting smaller. A lot of the young people are moving from the west to the east. So there is a fear of some of those communities about, will they survive into the future? And I think it's a role that government can play in terms of distribution of services. So access to health care. I mean, affordability is something, but in a rural area, it's also, will I have a doctor anywhere near me? And if I don't, I'm not going to live in this town. Will the hospital stay open? Will my small school be there so my kids can go to school? So there's a kind of second level of interests, and I think being able to speak to those, and it's about distribution of resources. If we support rural initiatives, I was really amazed in Kansas. The first time I ran statewide, I lived in the eastern part of the state, lived in one of the big cities, and when I ran statewide, spent much more time in western Kansas. I thought the talk would be all about farm prices and agriculture. It really was about schools and healthcare. If you don't have a school, the town closes. If you don't have a hospital, people won't live in the town. So I was really struck by how similar the conversations were, just with a little more passion. But I think you'll find also in rural communities, people are just thrilled that you talk to them and want to find out what they think about. So that engagement, I think, is, as we travel in Kansas, as you go west in Kansas, people are just thrilled you showed up. Because often they feel that folks are forgetting about communities in town. So you'll have a great time. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming, Governor. I'm a sophomore at the college. My name is Michelle Hall.
Michelle.
Of the 9 female governors, only 6 have husbands. And I was wondering how your husband, I think he likes to be called First Dude, either...
Oh, he'll be thrilled that you know that.
Tries to fit into the role of a governor's spouse, or tries to shape the role. If you could comment on that.
Well, it is an interesting dynamic. Again, you know, Jean should probably comment, because when she was governor, Billy was even lonelier than Gary is right now. We did have, when you're first elected governor, you're invited to new governor camp. And we went, and there were, at that point, I think there were 6 female governors, but I think 4 of us were married. And there is a large Governor Spouses Association, and the first item on the program in the Governor Spouses Association was managing the mansion with style and grace. Gary looked at that and said, I don't think so. I'm not going there. But what's happened is the whole group need to be updated, because a lot of the female spouses work full-time. I mean, we have federal judges, we have doctors, we have a whole variety. So it was really, the association was a bit of an anachronism, not that particular panel, the whole deal. I had a great experience at the White House this year. Governors are always invited to a social at the White House. It's great. You get all, black tie, the place is dazzling. My seatmate, I don't think I've told you this story, Jeannie. My seatmate was Governor Schwarzenegger from California. You may have heard of Arnold. He's an interesting colleague. Seated to his right was Jeannie Ritter, who is the new First Lady of Colorado. And so he had visited with her, and then he turned to me and said, so how do you like being a First Lady? I said, well, you'll have to ask my husband, Arnold, because that would actually be him. Whereupon he had a fairly frozen look on his face, and when Maria came later, they split spouses up, and he repeated the story to her. She said, oh, Arnold, oh, my God. So it is sort of interesting. But Gary's had a great time. He loves, he's a federal judge, which means he can't go to fundraisers anymore, which is thrilling to him. For someone to forbid him by ethics rules from attending political fundraiser is like the gift from God. So he has had a wonderful time. He's picked projects that he's been interested in. He goes and talks to kids in school about the justice system, he does a lot of reading projects. He's been involved in supporting for our National Guard families. So he's found a way to kind of balance a full-time profession with being the first dude. He did say the former woman governor in Kansas' husband was known as the first gentleman. Gary thought that sounded like way too much heavy lifting, so he said, I think I'd rather be the first dude. And actually, kids all over Kansas know that. They're like, dude, hey, there's the dude. So he's having a good time. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sarada. I'm a second year here at the Kennedy School. And after the recent Supreme Court decision banning a certain late-term abortion procedure, there's been a lot of talk about how the fight for a woman's right to choose is now going to move heavily into the states. And I'm just wondering, as governor, how you see that landscape shaping and how you plan to grapple with it.
Well, I think that's probably correct. If this is a precursor of what's to come, we're likely to have a real erosion in what has been a fairly firm Supreme Court on maintaining at least a protocol around a woman's right to choose. In Kansas, the legislature is more, I would say, anti-choice than pro-choice. And so I have, in the 5 years I've been there, vetoed a number of pieces of legislation. Vetoes are able to be sustained in our state. And actually, the voting public is slightly more pro-choice than not pro-choice. But one of the strategies that we've been trying to use to really, again, bring people together, and it has been, I'd say, somewhat effective, is to have a whole range of abortion reduction platforms. So everything from available, affordable contraceptives to sex education to adoption, subsidies, prenatal care for women. Frankly, most people don't want to think about that being the only choice that women have, women ending up in a situation where it really is a very difficult and very tragic choice. So working on some of those strategies that really give women and girls some other options has also been a way to kind of bring people together. At the end of the day, I have tried to make sure that health choices remain private and remain safe and legal in our state. At the same time, recognizing that there are strategies and ways and support we can give so that women don't end up in that situation. I did an interesting study when I was insurance commissioner as a way of driving this point home about contraceptives, and found that, and this was in the mid-90s, 95% of the health plans offered in Kansas offered Viagra as a paid-for drug, 25% offered contraceptives as an inclusion in the health plan. So that in and of itself made no sense. And so we've tried to, put issues like that very firmly on the table and say, if you're really serious about that, rather than changing the law, criminalizing abortion, locking up doctors, let's work on the other end of the strategy and figure out ways that we can really make more sensible healthcare decisions.
Please join me in thanking Governor Sebelius.